This work session meeting of the San Marcos City Council. Today is Tuesday, May 21st. It is 3 p.m. Ms. Trevino, would you call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Prather. Here. Mr. Scott. Ms. Garza. Mayor Houston.
Here.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Here.
Mr. Gleason.
Here.
And Mr. Mendoza.
Here.
We have a quorum present.
Okay, we will begin with our citizen comment time period. We have one person signed up, Ms. Lawrence. The next 3 minutes are yours.
I will talk fast, but I'm really good at that. Most of you probably know already, I'm the one who is doing the cemetery work and identifying all the veterans in the cemetery. And I have been working on it last year, so I put together a memo of my suggestions about the reforms at the cemetery, and so that got shot to you guys, the city, so I think it's all in everybody's inboxes somewhere, so that's in there. But just wanted to come and say that because I'm a budget guru, because my background, public policy background is in budget, so I wanted to highlight some of the things that have some budget implications of my recommendation. Most of which is, one of the things that I have recommended that I think would be really important to do is to have a kiosk at the front of the cemetery that has access to the database for the cemetery. Because with now over 8,100 graves, over 45 acres, it is enormously difficult for people to find where they're going. And so you assume that people can have cell phones with them, but it's very hard. A lot of people, older people, don't have cell phones with them, don't know how to use them, don't know how to find the city database. I grew up in Nebraska, in a small town in Nebraska, and my great-grandfather was the secretary of the cemetery board for almost 20 years. And in this small town in Nebraska, about 2,000 people, they all got volunteers together. They photographed every gravestone in the cemetery, and then they went and updated all the cemetery records. They built a big kiosk at the front of the cemetery. So now when people drive up to the cemetery, they go to that kiosk, and there's a picture of it in my handout, so they can just punch up and know exactly where their loved ones are in the cemetery. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And it was all done, I think, with volunteer labor or volunteer donations. And so it's got that kiosk, and then there's big maps, so it's easy for everybody to find. And the one thing before you all say we can't afford to do that, F4 tornado went through that town and through that cemetery, so they had to build something to be stable. But my suggestion is that you've got the mausoleum there. All you have to do is put like a city bus, one of the little bus shelters right next to the mausoleum. You could put the kiosk in there. Everybody would see it as they drive up. It would be protected, from most of the elements, and you could have some shade. If you need to power something, you put a little some solar panels on the top, and that would be really easy. And if you want to do a second one on the back side, I think you could put the kiosk in the chapel, and that would be really wonderful. Part of the reason why I started all of this work on the cemetery was last year I was in the cemetery over Memorial Day weekend, and relatives of Wallace Barber were there, and they were roaming around looking. They couldn't find his grave, and I said, is the plot location? I said, did you check on Find a Grave? And they said, no, there's no plot location there. So just by accident, I found where he was, so that before they left, they could pay honors. And so nobody knows mostly that the city cemetery has a database, but the database, from the work I've done so far, there's at least 1,000 graves that are not in the city cemetery database that are on Find a Grave now. And I've got 8,082 as of this moment verified entries on Find a Grave in that cemetery, and 930 veterans identified in that cemetery. So
your time is up.
What?
Time is
That's
up.
it, and that's where the money goes. And the memo should say, it tells you, I think, everything with illustrations, so you're good to go on that.
Thank you. And Ms. Trevino, that's the only person I believe who signed up?
Yes, ma'am.
All righty, then we will continue with presentation 1.
Receive a staff presentation, hold discussion regarding fiscal year 2024 budget process update.
Mayor, Council, Ms. Reyes is out this afternoon at an awards ceremony with her son. So I have the honor of sitting in and getting to present the introduction to the budget today. So good afternoon. We have a very deliberate process that we use in San Marcos, which is outlined by City Code. The process starts at a high level with your January visioning and our February budget policy workshop. At these sessions, council provides the parameters of what they want staff to include in the proposed budget. The schedule also includes regular check-ins for staff to keep elected officials as well as the public informed of what they can expect to see in the proposed budget in August. We have worked to increase community engagement surrounding the budget. This includes informational videos and presenting the budget and CIP to the Neighborhood Commission. As we prepare our '25 budget, we are mindful of council's interest in mitigating increases in property taxes and utility rates. The state legislature passed significant property tax relief last year with school property taxes, which is why our taxpayers are seeing school and city taxes at a much closer level than they had in previous years. San Marcos revenues are sales tax dependent. This makes us vulnerable to volatility in the economy. We need to use our property tax base and the ratio of how we get our revenues to offset the swings in the market that can come with this reliability or reliance on sales tax. In our current fiscal year, we have seen a decline in sales tax over the past few months, and staff is decreasing expenses to offset these reductions in revenues. We are diligently monitoring revenues and expenses in 2024 as we prepare the forecast for 2025. We remain intentional about keeping council informed on monthly sales tax data, and today, Mr. Locke will be providing the preliminary property tax rolls. The way to mitigate property tax increases to our residential taxpayers is to have a diversified tax base, specifically commercial and industrial development that can consistently pay more into the system. The same holds true for our utility rates. The annual demand to keep our rates low has led to the spending down of our utility balances, and for our electric utility has led to a downgrading of our utility bond rating. This is not sustainable. The last 2 years, we have focused on core services and the personnel to provide these. We want to continue to prioritize and expand on these by taking a multi-year outlook moving forward. Public safety staffing continues to be the #1 priority, and we are monitoring any additional capacity we may have to be used for this purpose. City Council was able to address some of the unfunded priorities discussed at the visioning session through the American Rescue Plan Act funding. However, we have also had to take into account how we will absorb these costs as this outside funding is exhausted. We appreciate council's willingness to collaborate with staff on setting parameters that will guide not only our upcoming budget process, but our operations through the next few years. Before we begin this evening's presentation, I'd like to take a moment to recognize our Director of Finance, John Locke, Budget Manager, Tricia Patek, and Director of Engineering and Capital Improvements Project, Sean Condor, for their time and effort in preparing this information. They have spent many hours compiling data and providing council requested information so that we could use this to inform our community about our current financial situation and future budget needs and constraints. I now turn the presentation over to Director Locke.
Thank you, Ms. Moyer. Thank you, Mayor and City Council. The primary purpose of this presentation is to provide budget capacity and trend information for the general fund. To begin the presentation, we'll take a look at the budget calendar and timeline, look at some current trends that are going to impact the city in fiscal year 25 with the city's population, the consumer price index, and we'll talk about how inflation impacts the city's budget, sales tax, and Ms. Moyer mentioned that we have the preliminary tax roll now, so we'll share that with City Council as well. And that leads to the general fund forecast, which really gets into what kind of capacity that we're going to have in fiscal year 25 and next fiscal year. We'll also provide a fiscal year 2024 update just on what the outlook looks like right now, and then end with some fiscal year 2025 revenue and expense considerations. So from a calendar perspective, we're at our first budget workshop, and there'll be one more budget workshop prior to the budget being submitted to City Council. Right before that, we will receive our certified roll. We should get that by July 25th, and that will lock in the tax roll information that we're able to use for fiscal year 25. On August 20th, that's when the budget is scheduled to be submitted to City Council, and on that same day, City Council will set the maximum proposed tax rate for next fiscal year. There's already been one presentation to the Neighborhood Commission. That was in April. We'll go back and once the budget is presented to City Council and present that budget to the Neighborhood Commission as well. There will be multiple public hearings held on both the budget and the tax rate. There'll be 2 on each, and those are on September 3rd and the 17th. And currently, it's scheduled on September 17th for City Council to consider the budget and tax rate adoption. This is another way to look at our timeline. The budget development starts really broad, and that's what City Council's visioning, where City Council provides the strategic goals and initiatives for the upcoming year, and it gets more granular as we work through the process. Right now, we're on the 3rd item down, which is budget capacity, and this is where I'm just sharing what that general fund budget capacity and what the trend information with City Council. The first trend that we'll share is just city population. This chart shows city population from 2016 to a forecasted 2025. 2016 through 2020 uses the Census Bureau information, with 2020 being the last census conducted. 2021 through 2024 are population numbers that were generated in-house by planning and development. They were able to back into or estimate these numbers by the number of permits issued. So you can see that we're estimating that the city's population is growing fairly quickly. And for 2025, we've estimated a little over 3% growth that will be around 89,000 in population. Population is important for us to keep in mind, because as the population grows, so will the cost in supporting that population, whether that will be in supplies or adding additional personnel to service or provide services to the growing population. Another important consideration is inflation. It's going to cost the city more next fiscal year to provide the same level of service that we're currently providing this fiscal year. And, you know, a lot of us can, or we can all relate to that. When you go to the grocery store and the things cost more, if you have to buy a new vehicle, that vehicle costs more. And that's similar to what the city experiences on a larger scale. Fortunately, the inflation has dropped from the historic highs that we saw post-COVID. You'll see in 21 and 22 where it reached as high as 7.7%. Currently, the last measure was in April, and it's at 3.4%. And we're estimating it's going to be somewhere around 3% as we start the fiscal year. And it's important that we keep this in mind. If our revenues or our resources don't keep pace with inflation, at some point you'll experience a decline in service levels because we're not able to keep up. Now we'll get into some trend information with our largest revenue sources. And in a general fund, that's sales tax and property tax. Sales tax is the largest revenue source. And a good way to look at sales tax trends is by a rolling 12-month average. It removes the volatility of just comparing 1 month to the same month in the prior year, because it takes the prior 12 months, and it's a good indication of trending for sales tax. And an example of that, if you look for December of '23 is 3%. And what that is saying is if you take all the sales tax collected from January to December of 2023, and you compare that to all the sales tax collected in the prior year, January, December of 2022, our sales tax grew by 3%. And if you go back a couple months to August 2023, that rolling 12-month average was at 9.5%. That's when the budget was submitted to City Council. Since then, it's been on a downward trend, as you can see. With our most recent sales tax allocation in April, it actually went negative to negative 0.1%. This is a look at our top 15 sales tax payers. What this slide also shows is it compares the total sales tax collected from October to April, just our year-to-date sales tax, last year, which is that first column, which is the $8.1 million, to the current fiscal year, which is $6.6 million. So our top 15 sales taxpayers have generated $1.5 million less sales tax revenue this year compared to last year.
Okay. The decrease in lumber costs with our number one sales taxpayer with Mathis Lumber.
Yeah, by far, the wholesale trade has been the single largest decrease from an industry perspective, and that is related to building supplies. We've actually had conversations with the business, and it is just the current business cycle that you're going through with the increased interest rates and the cost of lumber, and you have the residential market slowing down a little bit. So there's a lot of other variables that go into it, and they too are seeing less sales, right now, and they do feel like it's starting to stabilize though.
But like I saw like Kyle and other regional cities, like their sales tax was, several percentages higher.
Yeah.
And ours was, several lower. Just looking at the numbers and trying to parse out, is it the decrease in lumber price and that one sales taxpayer?
Well, our number one sales taxpayer makes up, in last fiscal year, made up 10% of our total sales tax. So if you start to see a decrease in your number one sales taxpayer of any significant amount, and they make up such a large percentage of sales tax, that it explains why we're seeing a bigger impact than what some of the other cities that you brought up are seeing.
I was also kind of surprised that Texas State just beat out Gucci at the Outlet Mall had the 11th most amount of sales tax. I didn't know that. That's interesting. That's all.
And I was just going to also mention, the reason the city of San Marcos is on there, we have to charge sales tax for electric and resource recovery services, so that's why we're on there. Fortunately, our sales tax that we're paying ourselves has not decreased, so that's good. And this gets into the slide that Mr. Prather was referring to. This compares the city sales tax regionally as well as across our peer cities. So the top part there is comparing it regionally, and it's taking a look at the same year-to-date, October through April. And as you can see, it's in ascending order. So the lowest sales tax regionally is the city of San Marcos. We're at negative 2% when you compare what sales tax we've generated this year through April to how much sales tax was generated last year through that same time period. And the highest is Kyle and Seguin. They both are around 8%. On the average, within our region, the total sales tax growth is 4%. So we're certainly trailing behind the region in terms of sales tax growth. If you go down to the bottom of the chart, it shows the peer city averages, which also includes the regional cities as well. The peer city average is around 4% as well. You have a low of negative 2.1%, and a high of 16%. And so you have Richland Hills and Garland in there. Both are somewhat of an anomaly with significantly higher sales tax. If you remove those two, the average would be 2.5%, just to put that in perspective.
I'm always leery when we look at, compared just to last year, because sometimes that year was an anomaly in that it was a boom year.
Yeah.
And so maybe this year is more, level.
Yeah.
If we go back 2 or 3 years, is it still in that -2 phase?
No, ma'am, no. It is, the last time that rolling 12-month average slide, we had that information going back to fiscal year 19. And the last time from that point forward that it went negative was right in the middle of COVID when everyone was going negative at that time. And we certainly rebounded significantly from that point. We're just seeing a downward trend right now.
So it's not a matter of last year was an anomaly and that it was a good year. So we're comparing against something that was higher than usual. This is just, it is what it is.
Yeah, we've been seeing fairly significant growth in our sales tax base for really since, even if you go back to fiscal year 19, it was around 6%.
Mm-hmm.
Last year was 7%. If you take out that COVID time period, we've really seen growth in our sales tax year over year. This has really been the first year that we've seen it decline
Yeah, okay.
in recent years.
Thank you.
On a statewide level, taking in all the cities into account, it's 1.7%. That's the year-to-date growth that the average city has seen. This slide, if you look at the center of the slide, and you can see the fiscal year 2024 actual in a box, that shows what we've actually collected through April, that 22.8 million. To the left, that column is showing what was expected in the budget. We expected at this point to be at 24.2 million, so we're 1.4 million short of where we thought we would be in the budget. We're forecasting to be about $2.5 million short. If you go to the right of the fiscal year 2024 actual, that is where we were at this point last year. So in fiscal year 2023, we're at 23.3 million, so we're about $500,000 short of where we were in fiscal year 2023. So this next slide is we're going to shift from our primary or our biggest revenue source to the second largest revenue source in the general fund, which is property tax. And we'll begin with just the growth in assessed values. And you can see that this is the average homestead assessed value. So you can see the growth over the years. From fiscal year 2024 to fiscal year 2025, there was a 9% growth from 338,000 to 369,000. There are a total of just under 7,800 homesteads in fiscal year 2025. And in fiscal year 2024, there was just over 6,700 homesteads. So we've seen a growth of about 1,100 homesteads. This slide has a lot of information on it. It provides a taxable value history by fiscal year from fiscal year 2018 to fiscal year 2025. It also has the tax rates through that same period. The highest tax rate here is the 61.39, which was post 2017 bond election. That's what the tax rate was set at, and we're currently at 60.3, and we've been there since 2022. To the right of that is the net taxable value. And you can see the growth. If you look down at 2025, it's $10.2 billion, which is 6% growth compared to last year. If you look down below the 6.3%, it has the 3, 5, and 10-year growth. Just to put that growth in perspective, it's a lot shorter than what we've experienced over the last several years. With the 3-year average being 15%, 5-year 12%, and 10-year 11%. If you go to the right of that, that's our tax increment financing zone values. So if you go down all the way to 2025, it's $1.4 billion. And you can also see the percent change in the tax increment financing zones, as well as, the 3, 5, and 10-year for that. That value gets removed from the net taxable value to arrive at what is labeled as the remaining net taxable value, and that's what the city has to operate on, as well as make debt service payments on for our capital improvement program. So the total value that for operations is the $8.8 billion, and it's up 5%. And you can see that that is well below, from a percent perspective, than what we've seen over the average 3, 5, and 10-year. And in total value growth, it's $422 million of growth. If you compare that to the fiscal year 2024, our current fiscal year. And if you compare the two prior fiscal years, it's over $1 billion of growth. So that puts in perspective the taxable value growth we've had over the past couple years, and then what we're moving into next year, it's much lower. So with all those values, we're able to calculate what the tax levy will be. And this next slide provides a historical perspective and trend information for our property tax levy. This is at 98%. The city typically collects about 98% of the total tax levy, so that's why it's shown at 98%. And if you look at fiscal year 2025, the total tax levy will be just over $60 million. That's up about $3.6 million from last year. There's a box around the blue columns, and I should clarify, the blue is operations, the green is for debt service, and the gray is for the tax increment financing zones. So the operations is what the box is around, and from 2024 to 2025, the amount of revenue generated is $1.3 million. That's how much more money the city will have to operate on in fiscal year 2025. So if you were to go back and look at 2023 to 2024, the difference in the blue columns, that's $6.8 million. So there's significantly less amount of revenue going into fiscal year 2025 compared to what we came into in fiscal year 2024. And even if you go back to the year before that, from 22 to 23, their growth was $5.8 million. So this is one of the lower years that we've had in the last few years from a property tax revenue perspective as well. So all of that trend information for the city's two largest revenue sources in the general fund leads us to capacity, and that's what this is. With the general fund forecast, it's providing what we're estimating to be the capacity in fiscal year 2025. The top portion provides revenues, and it has some actual information for the last two completed fiscal years, with 2022 and 2023. It provides the adopted budget, operating budget for 2024. It has the year-end forecast of where we think we're going to finish in 2024, and then what is being forecasted for 2025. Just to touch on a couple things on revenues, if you look at the sales tax, we finished 2023 at $39.9 million, just under $40 million. And we budgeted just over $42 million in this current fiscal year, and we're estimating to finish short of that by about $2.5 million. We're going to finish at $39.5 million. Fiscal year 2025 is estimated to be $39.8 million. So it's almost as if we completely skipped 2 years of sales tax growth going into fiscal year 2025. Our 25 estimate is less than our 23 actuals. Mm-hmm. So for fiscal year 2025, the total revenue estimate currently is about $111 million, 110.9. Right below that is the personnel and non-personnel expense estimate. So the personnel budgets, included in that is a 3% for growth in personnel costs for civil service, or, I'm sorry, back up. 3% for non-civil service, and the civil service is what is dictated by their meet and confer agreements. So the total personnel cost, as you can see, would increase from 75.6 to $78.2 million. The non-personnel is actually decreasing. The departments we're given the charge of keeping their 2025 budgets at or below the 2024 levels because of the resource environment that we knew that we were moving into in fiscal year 2025. So you can see that the non-personnel budget is $33.8 million, and that is the same as what was adopted for the current fiscal year. So even with those parameters, you can see that it's still just over a $1 million operating shortfall. That's what we're looking at currently. We're still refining this. Actually, right now, the city manager's office is meeting with departments, and we're going through all the department budgets. So it's still being refined, and prior to the budget being submitted to city council, there'll be a lot more work done on it. But as of right now, that's what the forecast looks like. So before, I mentioned in the agenda that we'll talk about the 2024 updates. And the biggest update is really on the sales tax and the impact that that is having on operations. We've already touched that we're estimating that the sales tax will finish about $2.5 million short of what we budgeted. There is sales tax contingency plan within our financial policies, and so staff is watching that closely and has identified $2.1 million of savings already. And those savings will continue to grow as we go through the budget process and work with departments to identify some operational savings to make sure we offset that $2.5 million. Also wanted to mention that there would not be a mid-year budget amendment. There was planned to be a mid-year budget amendment where we were hoping to be able to add 4 firefighters, 2 police officers, and most recently there was, due to the single-use container ban, the 2 deputy marshals. Because of the current situation with our sales tax, we won't be able to add those positions to the budget, and they will be the top priority for new positions that will be added in fiscal year 2025. So moving from that 2024 update, this is just some considerations for revenues and expenses as we move into fiscal year 2025. A lot of this information is just summarizing what we've already covered in the slides up to this point. First, beginning with revenues, is we'll continue to monitor the sales tax really closely and send City Council the updates as we have been. For fiscal year 2025, the estimate is a 1% growth on the base from where we are estimating that we're going to finish fiscal year 2024. So we're estimating 1% on the base, and that the outlets will remain flat. So overall, it's a 0.8% estimate in sales tax for growth in fiscal year 2025. That's what was included in that forecast that was shared. We're also seeing a modest increase in property valuations when you compare it to previous years. One thing that we wanted to bring to City Council's attention is new legislative changes that created an appraisal growth cap for non-homestead properties. It reduced the total taxable value. This was new for fiscal year 25. It reduced the total taxable value by $123 million, which equates to $745,000 in annual revenue that we would have otherwise had this legislation not passed in the most recent session.
Is this similar to the cap that's been for homestead for years?
It's very similar to that, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Locke, do you know off the top of your head what that number is, what percentage that is?
20%.
It is 20%,
Yeah,
thank you.
20%. And it only impacts non-homestead properties with a value of $5 million or less. And originally, this wasn't expected to have a very big impact on municipalities. Part of the impact for us is just a high number of rental properties that we have. So that's one of the reasons why it's impacting us. It's actually 5% of our total properties in the city hit this cap. Continue on with revenue considerations, and we're actually going to shift now from the general fund to the utility funds. The utility rate modeling is in process for all the utility funds, and just to reiterate that we'll be following the guidance the City Council gave during budget policy, that we'll continue with that incremental rate increase approach if a rate increase is warranted, rather than waiting 3 years and coming to City Council with a really big increase, just a small incremental increase as needed. And that the Citizens Utility Advisory Board will make and present the recommendations to council this year if there are any rate structure or rate adjustments needed in the electric and water wastewater funds. And the third bullet is just reinforcing that council has given the guidance for fiscal year 2025 that we'll use the general fund capacity again to fund the stormwater capital improvement projects. So shifting to the expense considerations, we've already touched on inflation, and it's trending between 3 and 3.5%, and the impact that that'll have on the city. I should have mentioned back on the slide when I mentioned that the departments were asked to keep their 25 requests at the 24 levels, that just by inflation of itself is a 3% budget cut, because it's going to cost 3% more to provide that same level of service. The current estimates for the general fund, just to reiterate those, just mentioned that most departments' non-personnel budgets were held flat when compared to fiscal year 2024. There were some instances where contractual increases that the department couldn't overcome those, but that's the reason for most. There's a 3% increase again in personnel costs for non-civil service, and the meet and confer agreements were applied for the civil service. And the last bullet, there's zero capacity for new personnel programs or services. That's really referring back to we're forecasting to be $1.1 million short, so that's where that zero capacity is coming from. And it doesn't, we are exploring opportunities where there might be, we might be able to add a new position that is a neutral cost. Like for instance, if we are paying a contractor X amount of dollars and we can bring somebody in-house and do it cheaper to where we could save money, then those are opportunities that we're exploring. And there's also opportunities where if we can add position, we can generate more revenue by adding that position. So if we can offset the cost some other way, we are exploring those.
If we've got software maintenance that we're paying that seems to be high, and new software would mean a lower monthly annual cost, are we looking at the return on, how long it would take to recoup those differences in a case like, it's something similar to that?
If a department was able to go out and get new software for the same for the same purpose, and on a departmental level, that is part of what they do. And if depending upon where they're at in a contract, if it's coming up to where the city has the option of continuing it or bidding that out,
Right.
yes, that is taken into consideration, Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
We also wanted to touch on some of the prioritized items that City Council has provided, both in visioning as well as budget policy. And these are a list of the items that have been addressed in the fiscal year 2025 budget or are currently in 24. The first is the municipal court location. So we plan to set aside some funding for the renovation costs that will be associated with municipal court moving into a building. And we've also budgeted for rent at 2 facilities in the event that that has to occur. The employee benefits, merit, and compensation plan. I mentioned that the non-civil services personnel cost increase is 3%. If it's able to stay at that 3%, that would keep pace with inflation for employees. The remaining bullets have either been addressed directly by American Rescue Plan Act funding or a hybrid of the funding. So the IT security analyst is in ARP funding. The mental health diversion and support is ARP funding. The eviction preventive service is ARP funding, as well as the partnership with Prevent-A-Letter of Central Texas. The downtown staffing, right now, we're looking at a plan that one of those positions is ARP funding, and we're also looking at an opportunity for another one to be in hotel tax. So right now, the one that we do have funding in place for is the ARP funding. And the last one, the single-use beverage container ban implementation, that was for the education and outreach. That was ARP funding and hotel tax funding. So just that brings us to our next steps. The next budget workshop is scheduled for June 27th, and that'll provide some draft budget information for the major operating funds, not just the general fund, but also the enterprise funds as well. The budget is scheduled to be submitted to City Council on August 20th, and as we mentioned at the beginning, that's the same date that City Council will set the maximum proposed tax rates. There are multiple opportunities for the community's input along the way. We've already presented the budget policy at the Neighborhood Commission. We're going to also present the budget after it's submitted to City Council to the Neighborhood Commission. And then there's a total of 4 public hearings that the community can come and share input with, both 2 on the budget and 2 on the tax rate. And then September 17th is the date scheduled for City Council to consider budget and tax rate adoption. And that concludes the presentation. Be happy to address any questions you may have.
Okay, council, this was a presentation. There's no decision points on this because we did those in January. And the budget, the vision workshop, we've provided some, and also budget policy in February. So staff has taken all of those guardrails and parameters into consideration, and that's what they're working with. And the budget that they bring back to us will be, I'll say, in compliance or within what we have already given. So hopefully we will stick with what we said, and they're working very hard to stay there. Do y'all have any questions?
I have one, Mayor. On the deputy marshals, what budget was that gonna come from after all?
That would be the general fund.
Okay, it was, all right, thank you.
Sure.
The reason I asked, Mayor,
yeah.
is I thought it was gonna come from Mitten Confer.
No.
No, that's what I was asking, I wanted to know what.
Does that meet and confer have anything to do with deputy marshals?
There it is. Mayor and Council, Rodney Gonzalez, interim city manager, assistant city manager. No, it doesn't.
Thank you.
But that mid-year budget amendment that would have added 2 more deputy marshals to help patrol our parks and stuff, right now that's on hold due to these shortfalls. Is that
Yes, sir.
correct?
Yes, sir.
And that shortfalls, the total for, we're looking at 2.5 million forecasted in shortfall. Am I
Exactly.
saying that correctly?
Yes. Yes, sir.
That's all, God, thank you.
And news to come.
Yes.
And we've been presented with the calendar, so stay tuned. Thank you, Mr. Locke. And thanks to all of the staff who are wrestling with this. I know this is not fun, and that you're, I'm going to say, scrambling to figure out what to do this year and next year at the same time, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So thanks to everyone and their diligence in working through this. Item 2.
Receive a staff presentation on fiscal year 2025 capital improvements program as contained within the proposed fiscal year 2025 budget.
All right, this next presentation is a brief overview of the fiscal year 2025 capital improvements plan. The presentation will include an overview of the schedule, public outreach, process improvements, and a detailed overview of how grants are impacting the CIP. I'll now turn it over to the Director of Engineering and Capital Improvement, Sean Condor.
All right, good afternoon. Let's wait for this presentation to catch up here on the screen, or there we go. All right. So the purpose of this presentation is really just to give you the overview. There's no action required. It's one of the processes we have to do through the budgeting process, so there's no action required at the end of the presentation. So what is the capital improvements program? It's a long-range planning. It's for scheduled capital projects and system assess assets. It's used to identify workload by department. It's also used to identify any funding needs for the city. We use it as an option to finance projects. How can we finance projects to determine the financing tools? At the end of the day, it's a planning tool, really. Year 1 is the only year that's being approved in the budget, with years 2 through 10 are essentially placeholders for planning purposes. So the CIP is funded through multiple funding sources. The general fund comes through the property and sales tax as well as license and permits. The drainage or stormwater fund is funded through the drainage utility fee. The electric fund is through the electric rates. The water wastewater fund is through the water wastewater rates as well as impact fees. And then we do have external funding such as grants. Kind of overlook of the schedule. You know, when we talk about the 10-year CIP, it's a year-round process. We're taking projects all year round. We look at them, we store them, and then in the fall, the October, November timeframe, we get together as with all the departments that would be impacted, and we review those. We look at them as far as workload, capacity, status of the project. Should we move these forward? Should we not? Are they ready to move forward? Stuff like that. Then in the December, January timeframe, we sit down with finance. We look at our model, how much, where our models stand and where rates are standing, where everything is. We come up with our funding constraints. And so for the FY 2025 CIP, we constrained ourselves at $35 million for the storm and general project. As Mr. Locke said, we're going to help, the general fund's going to offset the storm this fiscal year, or this CIP. So it's $35 million for those two. Water wastewater is sitting at $15 million, and electric is at $10 million. So once we get the funding constraints, we take it forward to, this year we actually took it to neighborhood commission in March, which is something we haven't done in the past, to kind of give them an overview and reach out to those folks. Then we go through the March, April timeframe. We send it through P&Z. We have 3 separate meetings there. We have the P&Z recommendation, and then in May is when I've got to come and present that recommendation to council. So just to clarify, what is the role of P&Z in the CIP? It is established by charter that we shall submit annually to the city council, not less than 120 days prior to the beginning of the fiscal year, a list of recommended capital improvements found necessary or desirable. I said there was 3 meetings. We gave the overview to P&Z on March 22nd. We had the discussion and public hearing on April 9th, as well as received their recommendation on April 23rd. And then, again, we did have the neighborhood commission on March 20th, which was a new meeting that we had not done in the past. Just want to touch a little bit on process improvement. You know, with the CIPs, it's an evolving document. There's always ways to improve and make things better. So we're all consistently looking at what we can do. And one of the focuses is really we want to present a CIP that's feasible and realistic when looking past year 1. And so we're doing that by focusing on master plans to justify project needs. We are continuing to update and evaluate project rankings. We have moved recurring costs into department budgets. We are looking at grant funding, and we've been pretty successful at that the last year or so. We have implemented a web-based CIP for easier identification of projects. We are working with finance on a debt strategy to help guide the CIP capacity. We are clearly identifying funding to associated bond election candidates in the CIP. And we're going to focus on the bond election no sooner than 2028. It's looking like 2029. I'll touch on that here a little bit further in this presentation. But I wanted to maybe turn the mood around and talk a little bit of good things, talk about the grants. You know, John he brought us down a little bit with the money, but we got some money coming from the other sources. And
I'm glad you mentioned that, and John did a great job in his presentation. And don't take our, how we took it as, but I'm glad you
Yes.
mentioned the elephant in the room, so thank you.
Yeah, no, we got money coming from other sources when we're short over here, so. The big one obviously is Sunset Acres. I mean, we got $13.9 million, which is huge for the city. That was a big success that, we might not have pursued that in the past, but knowing we have these needs that we can't meet, we're changing what we do, and we're going after that money. I-35 Shared Youth Path, we got a little over $2 million, and actually 2 separate grants got funding, so we got to figure out how we're going to navigate that process. But that's a little bit over $2 million for one project. Thorpe Lane at Springtown, we got TxDOT to sign off. They're going to build us a new traffic signal, and that's like $900,000. And then on Kissing Alley, we got about $200,000 out of TCQ for Kissing Alley, and on Sesame Creek, they gave another $120. So there's some recent success in the last few months. There's several out there, don't get me wrong, but these are some of the big ones that jump to mind. But with success, you do have some misses, right? And so we have missed on the Highway 80 utility. We were looking for $17 million in grant funding that we missed that. And the FM 110 connection drive was about a $1.7 million grant we did miss. So you're gonna have some swing and misses, but we'll still keep trying. Right now we got a few in the queue. The Purgatory Creek improvements, we got $36 million we're asking to get funded, and we feel really good about that. I'm not saying we got it, but we have been talking to the right people to make sure we have a good leg up, if you will. We're gonna find out this summer. I'm thinking probably July, August timeframe, so we'll know if that hits.
What's the source of that money?
We've funded through 2 applications. It's all federal money.
Federal, okay.
It's, so it'll be, I think it's a 10% match or so, 10% match, so. So that one we don't know. We should know that summer. I did get an email last on Sunset Acres subdivision. The $13.9 million, that's for drainage and streets. It doesn't cover utilities. So we tried to pursue some utility funding. We did not get selected to move forward in that application on that process. So that one actually should be shifted up to near misses.
Oh.
And then the flood infrastructure fund. This is the state flood plan. We submitted $49 million worth of projects for 14 projects. So in that process, it's a matter of it's to go to step 2 of the process. So we're not applying for $49 million. We just say, hey, these $49 million are ready to go to the next step, and they'll come back and we'll decide to move other projects forward if we get selected. I do want to note Highway 80, we have resubmitted. We submitted that in March, so we felt like we just missed the cutoff, so if we're going to try again, we should know probably this next 3 or 6 months or so. And then FM 110, we had some good conversations with I think it's the DOL. They really liked our application, and they want us to reapply, and they said we have a good chance on that one too. So we feel those 2 we're going to put them back in the queue, and hopefully we'll hear something good. That all said, we are working. We have worked with HAF, helped us out a lot last year, and they're the big proponent for pushing the Sunset Acres. They helped us out on that application, and so we brought them in and asked us to, hey, let's take another look at their 25 CIPs, or anything else we can look at, anything else we can pursue, any grants that have popped up since last year that we really need to shift our focus to. So we're going through that with them right now to see if we can get some ideas of better projects to pursue. So what are the big impacts on the CAP? When we talk about funding, the key we got to keep in mind, we can't apply for too many grants at once. And the key is because all these grants have a local match. So I get stuff all the time, hey, apply for this, apply for this. I'm like, well, where's that match coming from? Do we have staff to do that? Is the project ready to move forward? So we got to really look forward to make sure that we have funds for the grant. We also got to identify what is that match going to be. Most of the time, it's a 20% local match. Some are 10, some are less, but usually you can, if you want to write it in your budget, we usually budget 20% local match. And then it's a matter of design costs. Do you want to include design as your grant, or do you want to go after design and construction? There's trade-offs to that, and I'll cover those here in a minute. It's rare for projects to be 100% funded for design and construction. It does happen, but basically federal disasters, Blanco Gardens, Blanco River Range, things like that. So kind of the strategy we're using, and of course this could change over time, is we really focus on projects, or I should say grants, that are about $1 million and above. That seems to be the sweet spot for it's worth the level of effort to get that money, and it doesn't take too much away from the money coming towards the citizens. You want to target grants, or we like to target grants, that are 3 to 5 years in the CIP, and a lot of it has to do with the scheduling, because it takes a long time to get a grant through the process, get it approved, get the design up to the standards of that grant. So you don't want to pursue grants to start next year, then you need the money next year. So we look at stuff 3 to 5 years out. We identify grants that San Marcos will score well. We know we got some things that look good to certain agencies versus others, and so we want to target those grants, target those types of projects. And if we don't have that expertise, we'll look to consultants to assist us. Tell us, what are we missing on these applications that we need to include? And we'll work with city staff too. Sandra Venezuela does a good job. She pulls up previous awards. She's able to figure out what kind of amounts, what kind of agencies are getting, stuff like that. So we do a lot of homework in-house as well. We don't just rely on consultants for that kind of stuff. One of the key things that we like to do is get some design work done now. And the big reason is because you don't want to put a grant forward for $10 million when you needed 20. And so by putting that design cost in there and getting that going, we have a better feel that the money we're asking for is going to cover those construction costs. Because it's tough when you get a $10 million and say, oh, wait, our cost estimate just doubled, so now we need to find another $10 million. So by having that design done, we're able to reduce that risk. And also, it takes some time away. When you add design to a grant, you're pretty much adding 2 years to the schedule, because we can't do that until the grant's in place and approved. So we're going to, look at your scope. If there's some grants out there that score well for, like, say, bike lanes, maybe you add the bike lane scope to your project. If there's some grants that, if they have green infrastructure, gives you some points, you might want to throw that green infrastructure. So we look at those things that we can do to score well on these grants, and we'll include them. One thing we're doing differently in our stormwater master plan is actually we're including a benefit cost analysis task to the stormwater master plan. And what that does is that tells a lot of federal agencies on the flooding side, they want to know a BCA benefit cost analysis. They want that to be a 1. Does the project benefit cost outweigh the cost? And that tells us if the higher that number, those are the grants that we should be pursuing, those projects we should pursue for grants, because they stand out to those agencies. And then we do stuff in-house, like I said, we count on, we have consultants to help, we have small staff will do it. The Thorpe Springtown project, that was 100% done in-house. Our public works folks collected the staff, the traffic count. Our engineering team prepared the traffic analysis, and then we applied it and everything. So we can do it in-house. It's just a matter of every agency has a different type of grant that requires a different level of effort, and we got to know which level that is and where to put it in the queue. So next up is, I guess the key here is be flexible, because when you pursue grants, things change. It's always shifting. And so if we get a project that gets grant funding, we might have to push another project out because that other project needs the funding to cover that. Or maybe this grant has now added a year or two, so now they have to push that out. So we got to be flexible in the ability that not only will impact the project that's on the grant, but it might affect other projects in CIP that are not tied to the grant. We may seek council resolution for funds outside the typical CIP process. And y'all have seen this in the past. We come back asking for a resolution of support. A lot of agencies, sometimes they want the council to sign off that we're committed to providing that local match if they are awarded this grant. So you might see those in the future, and we'll roll that into the CIP. We'll document it through a spreadsheet, but it might be outside the funding cycle. And we might target some projects that don't seem as critical, but they're a great fit for a grant. And so if we can free up money over here, $10 million, that frees up this other $1 million over here to someone that never would have gotten a grant in the first place. So we're always looking to see how we can get that low-hanging fruit, if you will. Keep in mind, design costs will go up with the grants. We typically at budget about 10 to 20%. And a lot of that's just, there's a lot of things that we do that they do, but they want us to check a lot more boxes. And so it's a lot more effort. And then schedule requirements, just to give you an idea of timing. Typically, it takes 6 to 12 months for a grant agency to review an application, typically 6 or 12 to get an agreement in place. And so that could be anywhere from a year to 12 that impacts the schedule. But we'll build that into the schedule again. That's why you focus on projects 3 to 5 years out as well. So let's talk about a specific example. Let's talk about Sunset Acres. That was a large grant. We did have Half and Associates assist on the application. From the time we submitted to the time we were notified, it took 8 months. The project budget, the Sunset Acres as a whole, phases, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's about a $42 million commitment the city's making to that project, that neighborhood. We're anticipating about 7 for design. We've already given TxDOT $6 million to address the drainage along I-35. We got the wastewater main is in construction right now at 1.7. The detention pond, we're estimating 2.2. And then the phase 3 and 4, which will now be combined into a single phase, we're estimating $25 million, and that doesn't even include electric upgrades. So we're still, internally, we're talking, are we gonna handle this electrical undergrade conversion with this project, or is that still separate? So that, again, that's not grant eligible, but it still needs to be accounted for in the project schedule. So of the grant, $13.9 million, there was a 20% local match requirement of $13.2. The remaining $13 million that wasn't grant eligible. So it was water, wastewater improvements, or just wasn't eligible because it didn't meet the criteria. So we gotta come up with that other, that's what the funding I was telling you about. You can't, grants won't cover everything, so we gotta figure out, if we're gonna apply for a grant, do we have something to cover the other stuff that's not covered by the grant? This does not change the 25 CIP. The impacts made by this grant will be felt in the 26 CIP, because I'm gonna have to move up some funding for, because initially we had 3 million in water wastewater for 2027, we're gonna move that up to 2026, which means depending on how the chips fall, we might have to push something out in water wastewater, or we're gonna have to look at staff capacity, so we're gonna talk about that in the fall, but we are in pretty good shape. We get this project through, but it won't impact the 25 CIP. All right, there's grants. So now we'll just jump back into the typical, if you're not familiar with the CIP, this is where to look for stuff. You probably heard this presentation before, so, but basically the far left of the spreadsheet, that's the big, tells where all the money's at. It tells if it's a multi-funded water, and then if there's like a fire project or parks project, that'll be indicated in the far left column. In the middle there, we indicate strategic initiatives, comp plans, prioritization rankings. And then further over, we show the funding source as well as the years needed. And then as far as the color coding goes, the brown basically says it's TERS funding eligible, or TERS funding has been approved. So if it's further out in the CIP, we'll have to take it to the TERS board and get approved. The gray and white is really just to help break up the big, long, white spreadsheet. The pink just says it's impact fee eligible, and the blue indicates a project that staff has identified as a potential future bond project. So speaking of the bond election, you know, we talked envisioning, staff had brought up there were about $200 million or so in possible projects, roughly 170 to 175 general, 225 to 35, 30 storm. And so when we brought that, we said, well, we're probably thinking 2028 is the earliest we'd come. Since then, we went back and said, how can we make this happen? And a couple things jumped out at us. One is the bond election, we want to target general and stormwater. So we need to get the stormwater master plans. We pulled those schedules up. The stormwater master plan won't be done until 2026. The transportation's on track to be done in 2027. So we want to have those done so we can start picking off the top of that list to make sure they're put in front of the bond committee. The second issue is when you talk about general and storm projects, they typically need water and wastewater and electric moved to install that stuff. So we need capacity for the utilities. The debt capacity on the utilities doesn't fall until 28, 29. So that pretty much forces us to do a bond election in 2029 when we've got the projects, the master plans done, and we have the capacity to help offset the utility regulations associated with those projects. So what we're looking at here is a bond schedule of probably 25 to 27. That'll be used to update the design and costs because we want to come forward with good costs. We want to put the projects from the bond committee in 2028, give them a year to go through that list. Target a 2029 bond election in November, and the goal is to start construction on several of those projects within 6 to 12 months of that bond election getting approved. So, and then I do want to point out on this spreadsheet, the far right of the table, that's kind of the money we have targeted for the bond election. So if you're asking how much would we anticipate, that would be the amount that we target at this point in time. Next up, the CIP books. It's pretty much similar to what it has in the past. It's been simplified a little bit. We added a program overview to kind of give a CIP 101, if you will, to folks. And then we have a list of all the the projects. Then you have just the 2025, just the projects being approved in the CIP. And then we have a detailed sheet of everything, followed by the comp plan goal and the P&Z recommendation. We do have a QR code there if you want to get to our interactive website to for folks who like looking that route as well. So as far as P&Z concerns, they recommended the CIP to council with no amendments. As far as funding sources go, this is kind of where we stand, about 16.8 million in general, 17.7 in storm, which will be combined and paid off for all out of general. Water, wastewater, we got about 53.2 million, which a lot of that's getting offset by that wastewater agreement that was approved last council meeting. And electric's at 8.4 million. And just kind of laying the groundwork for 2026. This is kind of where we think we're going to be in 2026, but based off John's presentation, that could shift a little bit. But just give you an idea where things are going. Next steps. So we are handing off the city council, the P&Z recommendation and the draft CIP. We'll go through the budget workshops in May, August timeframe. I'll come back up to council in a work session in September, and I will present the final CIP. In theory, it'll be the same as today. If something does change, I will point that out to you and let you know exactly what changed, but ideally, they'll be the same. And then in September, the CIP will be adopted with the budget on September 17th. With that, I will leave you with a location for those who want to get to a digital copy or the interactive map. It's there. If you want a hard copy, it's there. And a nice little QR code if you like to scan it and get that way. So that's all I got, and I'll open up for questions.
Council, questions? First of all, thank you to you and everyone who works on this. Maybe every day somebody's working on this, and I know that it's tough and you're making some tough decisions, so thank you. Mr. Gonzalez.
Yes, ma'am. The boundary lines, what is the boundary lines for Sunset Acres? And the construction that's going there now on Broadway, is that part of this project as well? And one other question after that.
Sure. So you said what are the boundaries? Is that what you asked me?
Right. How far does Victory go, I mean, not Victory Gardens, but Sunset Acres actually go to?
Yeah, so the best answer to that's gonna be, I'm gonna say, look at our website, but it's essentially that whole neighborhood. So it goes out to the Mendez Elementary,
Okay.
and then it goes up to, just past Parkdale, and then it goes over to the Olive Garden, on this side of the Olive Garden, to I-35 on this side. So it's basically the Sunset Acres subdivision.
Oh, okay. Because there's some overlay being done there on the Mockingbird. No, not Mockingbird.
That's, yeah, different neighborhood.
Yeah. I just wondered, what was the funds for that? But there's no drainage, it's just the overlay for the street.
On Mockingbird now?
Not Mockingbird, it's gonna be,
Days of Allah. So there is construction right now on the wastewater line on Days of Allah.
yeah.
That's the wastewater line that council had directed us to move up because they didn't want the wastewater line to take so long. So that's the sacrificial pavement that, the cost that we're losing by moving that up and out of the scope.
Yeah.
So that's what you're seeing there.
Yeah, well, it is Mockingbird, I stand corrected.
Okay.
That's part of this project as well.
Mockingbird? That's
Yes,
a
sir.
different subdivision off of 123.
That's not
Yeah.
considered,
That's not Sunset Acres.
That's a public works project right now because of our constraints in the CIP. It's been identified as a CIP project, but we haven't been able to move that one forward. So it went ahead under our street maintenance, and we're doing that reconstruction of the roadways out there just because it's gonna be a while before we're able to fund that in CIP. And so that's why there's not additional drainage attached to it, but it is to get the sheet flow, the natural street drainage to work, but that is done under our maintenance program.
great. Well, they're doing a great job. All right, thank you, sir. That's all I have.
Is this the time that if we have any, can you move that, in the CIP, is now the time for us to, I don't have any, but I'm just asking, when is the time for us to address any changes that we might think need to be made?
Sure, you could do that now. You could do it year-round. We get those kind of requests all the time. And so at any time you want to do it, you just let us know, and we can look to see what the impacts are. But
I'm looking at what we're
Yeah.
getting ready to approve.
yeah,
Here
we
before too
traditionally
long.
don't get a whole lot now, but I'm not saying in the past it hasn't occurred at this
P
time.
and Z has, council has, I
It
mean,
depends on who's up there.
I'm just looking at what day is the time if we have any?
I would say October, November, but you could give it now, and we can make it work.
Council, any suggestions? I truly, I don't have any. I didn't want to miss the
Yeah,
opportunity.
I got you.
I didn't really have anything individually, any individual projects picked out. I do want to give a kind of a shout out to the interactive map. I have been playing with it while we were discussing this, but I also have played with it in the past. It's a little hard to navigate, but once you kind of figure out how it works, you can really dive into what is on the books for the next 10 years. So I encourage everybody to go in there and kind of dig around by neighborhood and year, and you can actually even do it by department here. So it's kind of an interesting interactive map that once everybody kind of figures out how to use it, I think it'll be pretty helpful. So, but I didn't have any individual projects other than it's a lot to take in, a lot of work. So appreciate all the effort on it.
Looks like we're good with what's there. Thank you. Ms. Moyer, was there anything else on that? So we move on to our next item. Item 3, Ms. Trevino.
The city council will convene an executive session pursuant to the following section of the Texas Government Code, Section 551.071, consultation with attorney to receive legal advice regarding the applicability of Section 86.003 of the city code concerning consent to annexation for the provision of utilities outside the city limits to a proposed development that is southeast of the city.
Looking for a motion to go into executive session. Motion by Mr. Gonzalez, seconded by Mr. Mendoza. Ms. Trevino?
All right, Mr. Scott, Ms. Garza, Mayor Houston,
Aye.
Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Gleason.
Aye.
Mr. Mendoza.
Aye.
And Mr. Prather. Motion passes 5-0.
All right, so we will go into executive session at 4:10, and we will return when we are concluded. Live, and next is question and answer with press and public. I don't see anyone here. Is anyone signed up?
No, ma'am.
All right, so that would be none, in which case I will take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion by Mr. Mendoza, seconded by Mr. Gonzalez. Ms. Trevino?
Ms. Garza, Mayor Houston,
Aye.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Aye.
Mr. Gleason.
Aye.
Mr. Mendoza.
Aye.
Mr. Prather. And Mr. Scott. Motion passes 5-0 with 2 absent.
And we're adjourned at 4:49.